May 21 is the federal election, and at Queer Radio over the years, we've had an opportunity to speak with various candidates from parties, some representative of our community, others are strongly supportive of our community. Mike Head, you have met before. Mike is from the Socialist Equality Party, and he's bringing along to our call that we're recording John Davis, and John and Mike will be the Socialist Equality Party candidates in the Senate for the election on May 21. Welcome back to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Blair.
And welcome for the first time to John.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So let's start with the first thing. If people were looking for the Socialist Equality Party on their Senate ballot paper on May 21, or if you're doing pre-poll, which starts on Monday, the 9th of May, they're not going to find you, Mike. What's happened?
Well, the Labor Party and the Coalition combined last August to ram through Parliament in 24 hours anti-democratic electoral laws that sought to deregister all non-parliamentary political parties, those are all parties that do not currently have a member of Parliament, disqualify them unless they could treble the membership list they handed into the Australian Electoral Commission within 3 months in the middle of a pandemic. Now, this was a deliberate and indeed you could say desperate move to seek to silence dissent as much as possible, to keep it off, keep our parties off the ballot paper for this election, which has proven to be an election of enormous crisis, with the pandemic actually worsening and the cost of living crisis soaring and the danger of war mounting. Both governments, both traditional ruling parties cannot afford to have opposition parties on the ballot paper. They're seeking to eliminate them as much as possible, particularly those providing a left wing, that is, a socialist alternative. So as a result of those laws, we weren't able to meet those requirements in the short time frame that was allowed for, given that the pandemic actually made it illegal to go outside our houses for a large part of that time. So we've had to go a different route, also very anti-democratic. To get ourselves on the ballot paper in 3 states in the Senate, we've had to nominate groups of 2. We have to get 100 signatures to nominate for each candidate, which we did. We got tremendous support in Brisbane and among our supporters to get on the ballot paper. But as a result of that, we only appear on the ballot above the line as Group I in our personal names. The name of our party, the Socialist Equality Party, is not on the ballot. And we think that is profoundly anti-democratic, not just for us, but for working class people who want to be able to vote for and record support for a socialist opposition to all the capitalist parties.
There are a few other parties or other groups. There's one ahead of you with a name I know well. They're from quite a far right position. They're not there. But several other parties are, and I find it really amusing that in the group, that's the independent Senate candidates at the very end, Bob Katter's party, they only have 1 representative on the ballot. So it really does seem to be a bit of a strange mix of how you get on the ballot and how you do not get on the ballot.
Yeah, well, the opinion polls are showing, historic lows of support for both Labor and the Coalition. And that's reflected also in rising strikes and struggles by teachers, nurses, aged care workers against what are becoming very intolerable conditions. The cost of living has just decimated people's living standards. They can't even afford to put food on the table. Real wages are declining. This is an impact of the trillions of dollars poured into the financial markets over the past decade, and particularly during the pandemic. And also now the war, which the United States has triggered really in Ukraine, which has affected food and fuel prices. On top of the pandemic, which has disrupted a global supply chain. So
yeah, so just on that, Mike, you've raised the war in Ukraine. Does the Socialist Equality Party support Ukraine's right to exist, or are they on the side of the special military objective that Vladimir Putin talks about?
Well, we're on the side of neither. We're on the side of the Ukrainian working class and the Russian working class, and we're fighting to unify them in a joint struggle against both the regimes involved. I mean, we denounced the Russian invasion, but we also explained that this is the result of deliberate goading by the United States. Ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, US and its allies supported a regime change coup in Ukraine in 2014 to install a government backed by very fascistic forces in Ukraine. The conditions that workers face in Ukraine are also shocking, terrible, very low wages, cheap labour conditions, very oppressive. It's not a democratic state at all. So we don't support either Putin or the regime in Ukraine.
John, I'll bring you in here because you're standing for the first time and you are someone under the age of 30. You are, let's say, an electorate that has been somewhat forgotten, I suppose, in a way, by every party. And this election is being talked up as one where the millennials and the Gen Zs are going to start taking an interest in politics and may decide who governs Australia after May 21. As a young person yourself standing, what is it that you're hoping to bring? What are the policies that you want to see being brought that will benefit the next generation that will live through until the end of this century?
Well, I think well, just to proceed from the previous points which were made, I think there are a number of issues which concern young people, my generation. I'm 28 years old. I work in hospitality at the moment as a chef. Anyway, there are all sorts of issues. So on the question of the drive to war, the thing about the Russian invasion is that, as Mike said, the United States has go to Russia into this invasion in Ukraine. In fact, the United States has, as of this week, past week, has pledged an additional $20 billion in military armaments to Ukraine in support, which effectively would mean that the United States is at war with Russia through the Ukraine. And this is a very serious issue because it begins to raise the question of a third world war, of this expanding beyond this initial conflict. And this is a concern for not just the younger generation, but it's a concern for everybody. But the young people in particular will be targeted. Will find this of concern because, frankly, we have a situation where it'll be the youth who'll be called upon to sacrifice their lives to go into this conflict. And for what? For profit, to secure resources, to secure geostrategic spheres of influence for the major powers, and in their sort of constant struggle between each other over these geopolitical issues.
So, John, just on that, that's a fairly international issue, which is a fairly strong position to take when you are a party that at this stage would not be able to influence foreign policy. Would there be anything that voters here in Queensland, particularly in Brisbane, would look at to the SEP, the Socialist Equality Party, and saying, here's something I feel that they can do for me that will affect my life now?
I think an aspect of this which is crucial is understanding the connection between the drive to war and the attacks on living conditions, the attacks on social conditions. If you speak to many young people these days, some of the major concerns they have: casual work. Most people, like I remember reading one statistic some time ago, a few years ago, where 55% of young people are in some type of casual, some type of underpaid, underemployed, part-time job or contract work. And that's just not in Queensland. That's across the country. I think that was from the Reserve Bank of Australia. It was about 3 or 4 years ago. And there's reason to believe situation hasn't changed for the better, but in fact is getting worse. The COVID-19 pandemic has been used to further destroy the conditions of workers, further destroy the, this is a very serious concern for young people. But so where is all this money going then? One thing that's been noted by the pandemic is the massive rise in social inequality, the enormous growth of wealth to the top of society. I think one figure, I think it was last year, the wealth of the richest 250 Australians increased by $50 billion, and that is to a staggering $520 billion. And this is while wages stagnate, unemployment is going higher. And for many, it remains a very, especially young people, the question of employment is a very real uncertainty. I was speaking to a young girl the other day who has to, she didn't even get notified that she was laid off of her job. She had to, she worked in the hospitality. She's a university student. She's 18 years old, fresh out of high school. She can't get Centrelink support because her parents earn too much. This is not unique to her. This is a situation which confronts millions of young people, and it's bound up with the very operations of the capitalist system itself. And I think it's the money's there, which can provide a decent, safe, and be able to provide young people to be able to, if they want to study, they should be able to be provided with the money they need to study. They should be provided with, and we're talking about to actually, be able to afford decent accommodation, decent being able to not have to, work through the nose, 20-hour job per week, alongside studying, alongside, which is also a full-time commitment. This is something that young people need, the youth need, but it's just not guaranteed under the system. Where's the money going? It's going into the pockets of the rich. It's going into the massive increases in military spending. It's going into the coffers of the ruling class, the rich.
Mike, on your website, which we'll put a link up to on our social media, the Socialist Equality Party has 10 demands. I suppose you could say these are the 10 major planks of policy or a platform that you would want to see enacted. How many of these, should you have any opportunity to decide how government is formed in this country, which are the key ones, Mike, that you would say these are the ones we want enacted immediately?
Well, we want them all, but this is a fighting program for the working class. We don't pretend any of this is going to happen through Parliament under the existing socio-economic order, which is dictated to by the financial and corporate elite, as we explain. I mean, for example, we demand a full living wage for all those unable to work, end poverty line payments to the elderly, disabled and unemployed, abolish all mutual obligation requirements and other degrading measures imposed by Centrelink. We demand an immediate rise in all pay to compensate for past erosion, index all wages to the current cost of living. Now, though the ruling class and its political servants in Parliament will say there's no money for any of that. That's impossible. We can't meet these demands and still be competitive on the global market. Well, that only raises the necessity for the working class in Australia and internationally to take power, to take control of production resources out of the hands of this tiny financial aristocracy. I mean, Elon Musk can buy Twitter, with what, $45 billion or whatever it is. This is a world dominated increasingly by a handful of oligarchs who rule like nothing seen in history over the rest of the world's population. So the demands we're raising are essential demands. They're necessary demands. They're demands that people need to live, but they won't be realised in the current order. But we raise these demands in order to provide a pathway, for the struggles that workers are now engaged in. And it's not just pie in the sky in that sense. Workers are in battles right now, teachers, nurses, aged care workers, for decent wages and conditions. And we fully support those struggles, and we elaborate the demands which are actually necessary for millions of people to be able to to live. So I put it that way.
Mike and John, time is almost up for us in this conversation. One of the things I would like to raise, though, and I think you've touched on it with the difficulty you had in being able to get on the ballot, is the lack of left of centre for those people who have a political viewpoint that's left of a centrist line. They will find it increasingly hard to find candidates. Here in the Federal Division of Brisbane, where Port Triple Z is located, the bulk of the candidates are centre or right of centre. As someone who is raising these issues, would it not have been better to try and put some candidates from your side or your party into House of Representative races where votes could be gathered for people who were feeling completely disillusioned with where politics was at this time?
Well, that's an interesting question, Blair. It raises big issues historically. The Socialist Equality Party is the only party fighting for the interests of the working class in this election. I mean, left of centre can mean many different things. The Labor Party still claims to be left of centre, but of course it's a completely pro-business party, as are the trade unions. They've been policing the working class for decades now, suppressing workers' opposition. We have also certain other parties, well, the Greens, but the Greens are a capitalist formation as well. They've been in government under Gillard. They want to be in government again. They pretend that you can save the planet by still remaining within the capitalist profit system. It's completely false. So we're advancing the need to build a mass movement from below. We're fighting for rank and file committees to be formed in every factory, in every neighbourhood, to prosecute a fight, to overturn essentially the existing political order. This is not an issue just for this election. This election won't resolve anything. No matter which party forms government, Labor or the coalition, or whether it's a minority government or not, it won't resolve a damn thing for the working class. In fact, things are going to get a lot worse. You know, the IMF has already said the debt is too high in Australia. They've spent billions of dollars on the bailout packages, on the military, and that's got to be extracted back from the working class. So this is, for us, the election campaign is not the end of the story at all. It's part of an ongoing fight from below against the existing political and economic establishment.
John, I'll give you the last word because this is your first time standing for election. How has the experience been at the halfway point for you? Has it disillusioned you? Are you feeling, what the hell have I got myself in for? Or are you going to be like Mike, who I haven't been impolite to mention how many elections Mike has stood for, but Mike has been fighting elections for a number of years. Is this something you want to keep doing as you advance in age?
Certainly, I think what's been very striking actually about the election is how much of a positive response you actually do get from people you speak to, and how what's been surprising to me has been the level of anti-capitalist sentiment that exists amongst students, amongst young people more broadly, but also the discontent with with all the major parties, and in that sense, one can get the feeling that people are looking for an alternative, but what would that present itself as? And I think part of our fight and part of the reason why we are standing candidates in the election is that it provides a platform, an opportunity for us to actually try and advance our program, to speak to these workers and to actually offer an alternative to the major political setup. Because this is, as Mike said, the only way to sort of resolve this crisis would be if the working class as a whole, students, young people, took democratic control of the central levers of society, the economy, of politics, the manufacturing industry, the banks, all that under democratic control of the working class. And that raises numbers of crucial political questions, which, to actually organise society to meet social needs.
Mike Head and John Davis, the Social Equality Party Senate candidates for Queensland. They are in Group I. It doesn't have a name, as you will have learned from the start of our conversation. They are Group I on the Senate ballot paper. Voting starts on Monday, the 9th of May for pre-poll and postal voting, with election day being Saturday, 21 May. John, thank you for coming to be with us for the very first time on 4ZZZ Queer Radio.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
And Mike Head. Mike, thanks very much for coming back. And we thank you for your support of community radio here in Brisbane.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you.